My father, Alav Shalom, Moshe ben Zahara, he was very traditional, Sephardi, literally from Egypt, not Egyptian descent, literally from Egypt. He tells us stories of having to have nicknames when they would leave their neighborhood, because if you were Jewish, as unfortunately as today, Jewish people in Arab countries are not so as safe as they should be. One day we'll be more safe, Hashem. So they had to have nicknames. Him and my uncles would have nicknames, William, so that in case they would speak to each other, they wouldn't give away that they're not Jewish, because if you would give away that you're not Jewish, that you are Jewish, so that it could be dangerous. Obviously, they knew people knew they were Jewish in their neighborhoods, but once you extend, there's no real loyalty, there's no reason to treat you like a human being. Unfortunately, our enemies can be very hateful, so we have to be careful. So that's one of the interesting parts of his life is, and it's funny because at least Jewish identity wasn't the problem. They grew up knowing that they were Jewish with a special tradition. And this is a blessing for Sephardim that lived in a place and time that there wasn't so much of that social acceptance. And so that was a protection, actually. And the Torah talks about it. When Yaakov says, save me from the hands of Esav, my brother. So we mentioned that there's an Esav that comes at you as an enemy with a sword, and there's an Esav that comes at you with a hug and a smile like a brother. And both are dangerous. And unfortunately, our European brethren, the Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, didn't do so well against Esav, the enemy that comes with a smile and a hug and let's be friends. That enemy, unfortunately, is a very tricky enemy. And unfortunately, many of our Jewish brothers, fell to assimilation with unfortunately the wrong ideologies. But the enemy that comes with a sword is very easy to understand. I don't want to die. I want to live. You're my enemy. I run away. That's a much simpler enemy to understand. And so that's the enemy my father dealt with his brothers. And so Baruch Hashem, they survived. Quick story reminds me of The Godfather. What really is that I guess there was one of the Arab neighbors or people that knew my grandfather, my father's father, Shmuel was his name. So I think he must have owed him some money and didn't want to pay it, and so he started a rumor that my grandfather was a spy. And so a mob of Arabs came to kill him, and they stabbed him, and they were going to kill him. But there was an Arab security guard or police officer that actually, they're not all bad, who saved his life. And they had to take him to a hospital because he was injured, and he would have been killed in the hospital because the word would have spread that he's a spy, and they would have killed him in the hospital. So they had to take him to a hospital that he would be safe. And that just reminds me of the scene in The Godfather when they're taking the Godfather to the hospital because he's in the hospital shot, almost dead, and the mobsters are coming with the crooked cops and they're going to kill him. And what's that guy's name? Robert No, the other guy.
Al Pacino.
That's Al Pacino. He comes and Zecher. No, never mind. I know. I mean, the Rasham are called dead even when they're alive. So Zecher, maybe never mind. He's not a tzaddik, so it doesn't work. Anyway, the kids are. So they had like mamish that they had to take him and move him, otherwise they're going to kill him. So I kind of relate. My story relates a bit of my grandfather. I like to tell that. You'll think it's a bit weird. But for some reason, me and my big mouth usually gets to telling that story to Arab taxi drivers when they're taking me somewhere. I'm not sure why, but that's when I decide to share that story and say, you know what? Some of you are not so bad. One of you guys tried to kill my grandfather, and one of you guys tried to save my grandfather. So at the end of the day, we got to make something out of this mess that we call, life in this world, especially in the Middle East. Anyway, so the positive story that I kind of got to the long way to get to is that he used to tell us to pray all the time when we were kids. He would say, you can Birkat HaMazon. Did he ask us, did we put on tefillin? Did we say Birkat HaMazon? But the very special thing that he did when we were all, I remember taking my brothers, my two little brothers and myself, he would take us out on the balcony and say, come out, look, Hashem, talk to him. Whatever is in your heart, to ask him, tell him, Hashem is listening, whatever you want. I found out many years later that he was Breslev, but just kidding. Okay. Anyway, so this is only the stam. This is just the talk. We do the sim, and then there's a real dvar Torah. This is only just some of the small talk so I can lighten up the mood. These siyums I feel always start off too rigid. So that was, I guess, to unrigid the rigidness of the siyum. Now let's get rigid over here. So I'm going to finish the Masechet Megillah. Truth is, I love this Masechet because it's short and interesting. And also, it reminds me of my mother, Allah Hashalom, also that passed away, because the Megillah is all about the story of Queen Esther, and my mother's name was Esther, and she had a rough life that on the surface did not look so So picture perfect, but that life is perfect. Picture of life is not a picture perfect, but it's life. And so too Esther, and the whole story of Purim tells us that it's not always going to be pretty, it's not always going to be beautiful, but at the end of the day, it's the most beautiful gift of reality that Hashem gives us is this idea that what we have. And so Esther really speaks for all of the Jewish people in that, she had a hard life. On the surface, she didn't have the life of Sarah, with a tent that had the Shechina and Ner candles that lasted from Shabbos to Shabbos, nor Challah that lasted from Shabbos to Shabbos. She had a life that on the surface, I would imagine, if we were to be there, we could take one of those nice time travel machines that they'll have soon, and listen to some of the gossip in her day. I don't think that everyone understood the tzaddik that she was, and so that's sometimes the story of the Jewish people. My mother, Aleha Shalom, had a rough life, and on the surface it wasn't a pretty story. It wasn't the story of Sarah. It was much more like the story of Esther. But in the end of the day, the Chazal connect Esther and Sarah together to tell us that just like Sarah's life was a life of a Jewish life connecting to Hashem, so too even the stories that look like they're the first we can imagine from a connection with Hashem, there's a connection there. And we, more than anybody, that have come a long way from you're not my priest, I'm not going to tell you exactly where I'm coming from, but it's not a pretty story. But there's light and there's a connection that's there in the darkest times, and it's there in the great times, and may we experience great times in the future. Mashiach will come and all of the Shochnei Afar will rise, and all of the righteous that we saw that were righteous, and all of the righteous that we didn't realize how righteous they were, will all be back together with Mashiach Tzidkenu.